Every morning at exactly 7:47 a.m., 12-year-old Zara Mendez would pause at the corner of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue, reach into her worn canvas backpack and pull out half of her peanut butter sandwich. Not because she wasn't hungry, she was always hungry, but because someone else needed it more. That someone had 4 legs, golden brown fur matted with city dust, and eyes that held more wisdom than most humans twice Zara's age. The dog had appeared on that corner 3 months ago, limping on his left hind leg and looking as lost as Zara often felt navigating the complexities of 7th grade. While other kids hurried past, phones glued to their faces, Zara had stopped. She'd always been different that way. Her mother called it her blessing and curse, to notice the forgotten corners of the world. "Hey there, beautiful," she had whispered that first day, crouching down despite her mother's warnings about stray animals. The dog's tail had given the faintest wag, and something in Zara's chest had cracked open like a door that had been locked too long. Zara lived with her mother, Elena, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chen's grocery store. Elena worked 16-hour days as a seamstress, her fingers dancing across fabric until they bled, trying to make ends meet after Zara's father had left when she was 7. Their apartment smelled perpetually of rice and beans, the steam from Elena's iron, and the faint scent of hope that tomorrow might be easier than today. The neighborhood was a patchwork quilt of struggling families and forgotten dreams. Cracked sidewalks told stories of children who'd learned to skip over the broken pieces, while corner stores with bulletproof glass served as community centers where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was the kind of place where a girl sharing her lunch with a stray dog was either the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen or the most foolish, depending on how much hope you had left in your heart. Zara had named the dog Copper, after the way the morning sun caught the reddish highlights in his fur. He was medium-sized, probably a mix of golden retriever and something else, something that had given him those impossibly expressive dark eyes and the kind of gentle soul that made children want to tell him their secrets. Copper's left leg had been injured, possibly by a car, and he walked with a slight limp that made Zara's heart ache every time she saw it. But despite his physical pain, there was something regal about the way he carried himself, as if he remembered being loved once and was patiently waiting for that love to find him again. The ritual had developed naturally. Every school day, Zara would leave her apartment at 7:30 a.m., walk the 6 blocks to Roosevelt Middle School, and stop at Copper's corner. She'd sit on the concrete steps of the abandoned pharmacy, pat her lap, and wait. Copper would emerge from wherever he'd spent the night, sometimes from behind the dumpster, sometimes from the narrow alley between buildings, and approach with that careful dignity that marked him as different from other strays. "Good morning, handsome," Zara would say, scratching behind his ears while he pressed his warm body against her legs. "Ready for breakfast?" She'd break her sandwich in half, keeping the smaller piece for herself and giving Copper the larger portion. On days when her mother had managed to pack her an apple or a bag of chips, those got shared too. Copper would eat slowly, as if he understood the sacrifice, occasionally looking up at Zara with those knowing eyes that seemed to say thank you, in a language that transcended words. The other kids at school had noticed, of course. Some, like her best friend Lyra, thought it was sweet. Others, particularly Madison Hartwell and her crew of perfectly dressed followers, found it amusing in the cruel way that 12-year-olds could be. "Look, it's the dog girl," Madison would whisper loud enough for everyone to hear as they passed Zara's corner. Maybe if she spent less time with mutts and more time on her appearance, she wouldn't be such a freak. Zara had learned to let the comments slide off her like rain on a window. She'd discovered early that people who mocked kindness usually did so because they'd forgotten how to be kind themselves. Besides, Copper's unconditional acceptance meant more to her than the approval of kids who measured worth by the labels on their clothes. Lyra Chen, whose grandmother owned the grocery store below Zara's apartment, was the exception. She had warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of quiet strength that came from being raised by a woman who'd survived more hardships than most people could imagine. "I think what you're doing is beautiful," Lyra had told Zara one October morning as they walked to school together. "My grandmother says that how we treat animals shows who we really are inside." "Your grandmother is wise," Zara had replied, glancing back at Copper, who was finishing his breakfast on the pharmacy steps. I can't walk past him knowing he's hungry. It doesn't feel right." What Zara didn't know was that her daily act of compassion had attracted attention beyond the typical middle school gossip mill. For the past month, a sleek black sedan had been parked at various locations along her route to school, its tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. The car was expensive, the kind that whispered rather than announced wealth, and it seemed to appear whenever Zara was feeding Copper. At first she'd thought it was coincidence. Rich people drove through their neighborhood sometimes, usually lost or slumming it for some inexplicable reason. But as the weeks passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The car was always there during her morning ritual, always positioned where the occupant could observe her interaction with Copper. "Lyra," Zara had whispered one Thursday morning as they approached the corner where Copper waited, "do you see that car?" Lyra followed her gaze to the black sedan parked across the street. "The fancy one?" "Yeah, I've noticed it before. Why?" "It's been there almost every day for weeks. Always when I'm feeding Copper." Zara's voice carried a note of concern. "What if someone's watching us? What if they're planning to hurt Copper?" The thought made her stomach clench with fear. She'd heard stories about dogfighting rings, about people who stole strays for terrible purposes. The idea that her daily kindness might have put Copper in danger made her feel sick. "Maybe we should tell someone," Lyra suggested. But even as she said it, both girls knew their options were limited. The police had bigger problems than a possibly suspicious car, and their parents were too busy working to investigate what might be nothing more than teenage paranoia. So Zara continued her routine, but now with a watchful eye on the mysterious sedan. She started varying her route slightly, taking different streets to approach Copper's corner. But the car always seemed to find them. Whoever was inside was definitely tracking their movements, and the knowledge made Zara's skin crawl with unease. The weather was turning colder, as November settled over the city like a gray blanket. Zara had started bringing an old towel from home, spreading it on the concrete step so Copper would have something warm to lie on while he ate. She'd also begun saving up her allowance, the few dollars her mother could spare each week, to buy him a proper collar and maybe even a small bag of dog food. "You deserve better than my leftover sandwiches," she'd tell him, running her fingers through his increasingly thick winter coat. "You deserve a real home, with people who love you, and a warm bed and all the food you can eat." Copper would tilt his head at the sound of her voice, his tail wagging slowly as if he understood every word. Sometimes Zara wondered if he'd had a family once, if someone somewhere was missing him as much as she'd miss him if he disappeared. The thought of losing Copper had become her greatest fear. He was more than just a dog she fed. He was her confidant, her reminder that goodness existed in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. When Madison and her friends made her feel invisible, when her mother worked so late that Zara fell asleep before she came home, when the loneliness of being different felt overwhelming, Copper was there with his steady presence and unconditional love. It was on a particularly gray Monday morning in late November that everything changed. Zara was running slightly late. Her alarm hadn't gone off, and she'd had to help her mother find her reading glasses before rushing out the door. She jogged the last 2 blocks to Copper's corner, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Copper was waiting as always, but something felt different. He seemed more alert than usual, his ears perked forward and his body tense with anticipation. As Zara approached, she noticed the black sedan was parked closer than ever before, directly across from the pharmacy steps. "Morning, beautiful boy," she said, trying to keep her voice normal despite the anxiety building in her chest. She pulled out her sandwich, turkey and cheese today, a rare treat, and began to break it in half. That's when she heard the soft hum of an expensive engine, and the whisper of tires on asphalt. The black sedan was moving, crossing the street with deliberate slowness. Zara's heart began to race as the car pulled up to the curb directly beside her and Copper. But it wasn't the sedan that made her jaw drop. It was the vehicle that followed behind it. A pristine white limousine that seemed to stretch for half a block, its chrome gleaming despite the overcast sky. The limo glided to a stop behind the sedan, and for a moment, the entire street fell silent, except for the gentle rumble of idling engines. Zara clutched the sandwich pieces in her hands, her mind racing through possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Was feeding Copper illegal? Were these people here to take him away? The questions tumbled over each other in her mind as she watched the sedan's driver door open. A man in a crisp black suit emerged, his movements precise and professional. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from years of handling delicate situations. He approached Zara and Copper with measured steps, his expression neutral but not unkind. "Miss Mendez," his voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "My name is James Morrison. I work for someone who's been looking for this dog for a very long time." Zara's world tilted on its axis. Looking for Copper? Her mind struggled to process the implications. I don't understand. Copper doesn't belong to anyone. He's a stray." James' expression softened slightly. "Actually, miss, his name is Winston, and he belongs to my employer, Mr. Blackwood. Winston went missing 4 months ago, and Mr. Blackwood has been searching for him ever since." As if summoned by his name, the limousine's rear door opened with a soft click. Zara watched in stunned silence as an elderly man emerged, moving slowly but with unmistakable purpose. He was probably in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His expensive suit couldn't hide the slight tremor in his hands, or the way his face crumpled with emotion as his gaze fell on Copper. "Winston?" The old man's voice was barely a whisper, thick with months of grief and sudden, overwhelming hope. Copper, Winston, had gone completely still. His ears were forward, his body rigid with attention. Then, as if a dam had burst, he began to whine, a sound of pure joy and recognition that made Zara's heart clench. The dog launched himself forward, his injured leg forgotten in his excitement, and threw himself against the old man's legs. "Oh, my boy," the man sobbed, dropping to his knees on the sidewalk without regard for his expensive clothes. "My dear, dear boy. I thought I'd lost you forever." Winston was beside himself with joy, spinning in circles despite his limp, his tail wagging so hard his entire body wiggled. He covered the man's face with kisses, whimpering and crying in the way dogs do when they're overwhelmed with emotion. Zara stood frozen, the sandwich pieces still clutched in her hands, watching this reunion with a mixture of wonder and heartbreak. This was what love looked like. Pure, uncomplicated, and powerful enough to bridge months of separation and uncertainty. The old man looked up at her through his tears, his eyes bright with gratitude. "You're the girl who's been taking care of him. James has been watching, documenting your kindness. Every day you've shared your lunch with my Winston." I called him Copper," Zara managed to say, her voice small and confused. "I thought he was homeless." "He was," the man said, struggling to his feet with Winston pressed against his side. "He got out of our yard during a thunderstorm 4 months ago. The thunder terrifies him, always has, and he must have squeezed through a gap in the fence. We searched everywhere, hired private investigators, put up flyers, offered rewards, but somehow he ended up here, 6 miles from home, and you—" His voice broke again. "You saved his life." The man extended his hand to Zara, and she noticed it was shaking slightly. "I'm Aldrich Blackwood, and I owe you a debt I can never repay." Zara recognized the name immediately. Everyone in the city knew Aldrich Blackwood. He owned half the downtown buildings, had his name on the children's hospital wing, and was regularly featured in the newspaper's society pages. He was one of the richest men in the state, and he was standing on a cracked sidewalk in her neighborhood, crying over a dog she'd been feeding peanut butter sandwiches. "I don't understand," Zara said, looking between Mr. Blackwood and Winston. "If you're so rich, why didn't you find him sooner? Why didn't the investigators find him?" Mr. Blackwood's smile was sad but genuine. "Money can't buy everything, my dear. It can hire investigators and print flyers, but it can't make a scared, injured dog trust strangers. Winston was too frightened to approach anyone but you. James has been watching for weeks, documenting how you've been caring for him, trying to understand why he'd only accept help from one person." He gestured to James, who stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. "We have video footage of your daily routine. Winston would hide whenever anyone else approached, but with you," he showed Zara the screen, which displayed a clear image of her sitting on the pharmacy steps with Winston's head in her lap. "With you, he was completely relaxed, trusting, happy." Zara stared at the video, seeing herself and Winston from an outsider's perspective. In the footage, she looked small and ordinary, just a girl sharing her lunch with a dog. But Winston's body language told a different story. He was completely at peace, his tail wagging slowly as he ate, his eyes never leaving her face. "Hell loves you," Mr. Blackwood said softly. "And it's clear that you love him too." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. She did love Winston. Copper. More than she'd ever loved anything in her life. He'd become her anchor, her daily reminder that she mattered to someone, even if that someone had 4 legs and couldn't speak. The thought of losing him felt like losing a piece of her soul. "Are you going to take him away?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Blackwood's expression grew thoughtful. "That's what I came here to do. Winston is my dog, legally and emotionally. He's been my companion for 8 years, since he was a puppy. When my wife died 3 years ago, he was the only thing that kept me from—" He paused, collecting himself. "He saved my life, just as much as you saved his." Zara felt tears building behind her eyes. Of course Winston belonged with Mr. Blackwood. Of course this wonderful, loving dog had a real home with someone who could provide for him properly. She was just a 12-year-old girl who could barely afford to feed herself, let alone a dog. "I understand," she said, kneeling down to wrap her arms around Winston's neck. "I'm glad he has someone who loves him. I'm glad he has a real home." Winston seemed to sense her distress. He pulled away from Mr. Blackwood and pressed his nose against Zara's cheek, his warm breath tickling her skin. She buried her face in his fur, memorizing his scent, the feel of his soft ears, the way he always seemed to know exactly what she needed. Then she glanced at Raider, and a second thought haunted her mind. Unknowingly, she blinked. "I'm going to miss you so much," she whispered into his fur. "But you deserve to be with your real family. You deserve to be happy." Mr. Blackwood watched this exchange with growing emotion. Here was a child who had nothing, giving up the thing she loved most because she believed it was right. The generosity of spirit, the selflessness, reminded him of his late wife, Margaret, who had possessed the same rare ability to put others' needs before her own. "Miss Mendez," he said carefully, "would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Zara looked up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Okay. How long have you been sharing your lunch with Winston?" "About 3 months, since I first found him here." "And in all that time, have you ever missed a day?" Zara thought about it. "Only when I was sick with the flu for 2 days in October. But I asked my friend Lyra to bring him food while I was gone." Mr. Blackwood nodded slowly. "James tells me you often give Winston the larger portion of your lunch." "Why?" "Because he's bigger than me," Zara said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And he was so thin when I found him. He needed it more, even when that meant you went hungry." Zara shrugged. "I can always eat when I get home. Winston didn't have anyone else to take care of him." Mr. Blackwood exchanged a long look with James, some silent communication passing between them. Then he turned back to Zara, his expression serious but kind. "Miss Mendez, I have a proposition for you. But first I need to know, do you think Winston would be happy living with just me again, or do you think he might need both of us?" Zara's heart began to race. What do you mean? I mean that Winston has clearly bonded with you in a way that's extraordinary. In all my years of owning dogs, I've never seen anything like the connection you two have. And frankly, I think you need each other." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm an old man, Miss Mendez. I live alone in a big house with more rooms than I know what to do with. Winston has been my only companion since my wife died. But watching him with you today, I realized that maybe we've both been incomplete." Zara's mind was spinning. "I don't understand what you're asking." Mr. Blackwood smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since he'd arrived. "I'm asking if you'd like to be Winston's co-parent. I'm asking if you'd like to come live with us." The words hung in the air like a soap bubble, beautiful and impossible. Zara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Live with you? I've been watching you for weeks, Miss Mendez. I know about your mother's work schedule, about your financial situation, about the fact that you walk to school alone every day because she's already at work. I know you're a good student, a kind person, and that you love Winston as much as I do." He gestured to the limousine behind him. "I have a proposal to make to you and your mother, but first, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll make sure Winston is taken care of, and I'll make sure you can visit him whenever you want." Zara's head was spinning. This felt like a dream, like something that happened to other people in movies, not to girls from her neighborhood who fed stray dogs with half their lunch. "I need to talk to my mom," she said finally. "Of course you do. James has already spoken with her. She's waiting for us at your apartment." Zara's eyes widened. "You talked to my mom?" "We wanted to make sure she was comfortable with this conversation before we approached you. She's a remarkable woman, Miss Mendez. You're very lucky to have her." As if in a trance, Zara found herself walking toward the limousine, Winston pressed against her side, and Mr. Blackwood's gentle hand on her shoulder. James held the door open, and she slid into the most luxurious interior she'd ever seen. Leather seats softer than her bed, a small refrigerator, and windows that made the outside world look like a movie. Winston jumped in beside her, immediately settling with his head in her lap, as if he'd been riding in limousines his entire life. Mr. Blackwood sat across from them, his eyes twinkling with something that looked like hope. "Miss Mendez," he said as the limousine began to move, "I want you to know that this isn't charity. This is necessity. Winston needs you, and frankly, I think I need you too. You've reminded me what it means to love without expecting anything in return. You've shown me that kindness isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about what you choose to give, even when you have nothing to spare." The ride to her apartment building took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like traveling between two different worlds. When they pulled up in front of Mrs. Chen's grocery store, Zara saw her mother waiting on the sidewalk, her face a mixture of worry and wonder. Alina Mendez was a small woman with calloused hands and eyes that held the weight of too many struggles. But when she saw Zara emerge from the limousine with Winston at her side, her face lit up with the kind of joy that made her look years younger. "Mija," she said, opening her arms. "Are you okay?" Zara ran to her mother, Winston following closely behind. "Mom, this is Winston, and this is Mr. Blackwood. He's Winston's owner, and he wants to offer us a new life," Alina said softly, her eyes meeting Mr. Blackwood's over Zara's head. "He's already explained everything to me." Mr. Blackwood approached them slowly, respectfully. "Mrs. Mendez, I hope you'll consider my offer. I know it's unusual, but I believe it could benefit all of us." Elena looked down at Zara, then at Winston, who was sitting patiently beside them with his tail wagging slowly. "Tell me again what you're proposing." "I'm proposing that you and Zara come live with Winston and me. I have a large house with a separate wing that could be yours entirely, your own kitchen, living room, bedrooms, complete privacy. Zara could attend the private school near my home, which has an excellent academic program. You could continue your seamstress work, but perhaps take on more selective, higher-paying clients. Or, if you prefer, you could manage my household staff and oversee Winston's care." He paused, his expression earnest. "I'm not asking you to be my employees. I'm asking you to be my family. Winston has already chosen Zara as his second parent, and I think that's exactly what he needs. What we all need." Alina was quiet for a long moment, her seamstress fingers absently stroking Winston's head. "And if it doesn't work out? If Zara is unhappy, or if you change your mind? Then you'll have a trust fund that will ensure you never have to worry about money again," Mr. Blackwood said simply. "But I don't think that will be necessary. I think Winston has brought us together for a reason." Zara looked up at her mother, seeing the tears in her eyes. "Mom, what do you think?" Elena cupped her daughter's face in her hands. "I think that sometimes miracles come in the form of a little girl who shares her lunch with a lost dog. I think that sometimes the universe rewards kindness in ways we never expect." She turned to Mr. Blackwood. "We'll try it, for Winston and for Zara, and for the chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves." Mr. Blackwood's smile was radiant. "Then welcome to the family." 6 months later, Zara stood in the garden of what was now her home, watching Winston, she still called him Copper sometimes, and he answered to both names, chase butterflies through the flower beds. The limp in his leg had improved with proper veterinary care, and his coat gleamed with health and happiness. The transition hadn't been without its challenges. Learning to live in a mansion, attending a new school, adjusting to having more than enough of everything, it had all been overwhelming at first. But Mr. Blackwood, who insisted she call him Grandpa Aldrich, had been patient and understanding, helping her navigate this new world while never making her feel like she didn't belong. Her mother had flourished too, taking over the management of the household staff and discovering a talent for organizing that had always been suppressed by the chaos of poverty. She'd also started a small business, creating custom clothing for Mr. Blackwood's wealthy friends, her reputation growing through word of mouth and her natural artistic ability. But the best part, the part that made everything else worthwhile, was Winston. He slept in Zara's room every night, his warm body pressed against her side, his gentle snores a lullaby that reminded her she was loved. During the day he followed her around the house and garden, his tail wagging whenever she looked his way, his eyes bright with the contentment of a dog who knew he was exactly where he belonged. "You know," Mr. Blackwood said, joining her in the garden with 2 glasses of lemonade, "I used to think that losing Margaret was the worst thing that could happen to me. Then Winston disappeared, and I thought that was the worst thing. But now I realize that sometimes what feels like loss is actually the universe making room for something better." Zara accepted the lemonade gratefully, her eyes still on Winston. "Do you think he remembers being lost? Do you think he remembers being hungry and scared?" "I think he remembers being found," Mr. Blackwood said softly. "I think he remembers a little girl who saw him when everyone else looked away, who gave him half her sandwich, even when she was hungry herself. I think he remembers that love isn't about what you have. It's about what you're willing to share." As if he'd heard his name, Winston trotted over to them, his tail wagging and his mouth open in what looked like a smile. He pressed against Zara's legs, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears, marveling at how different her life had become since that first morning when she'd decided to share her breakfast with a lonely dog. "I love you, Winston," she whispered, and his tail wagged harder. "And I love you too, my dear," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you. You've given an old man a reason to wake up in the morning, and you've given Winston the family he always deserved." The story of Zara and Winston became legend in their old neighborhood. Mrs. Chen still told customers about the little girl who'd shared her lunch with a stray dog and ended up finding a family she never knew she needed. The tale spread through social media, inspiring others to look for the forgotten corners of their own worlds, to see the Winstons waiting patiently for someone to notice them. But for Zara, the real miracle wasn't the mansion or the private school or the trust fund that would ensure her future. The real miracle was the lesson she'd learned on a cracked sidewalk outside an abandoned pharmacy. That kindness creates ripples we can't imagine. That love multiplies when we give it away. And that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change the entire trajectory of our lives. Every morning she still woke up at 7:30, a.m. But now, instead of walking to school with half a sandwich in her backpack, she walked through her garden with Winston at her side. Both of them whole, both of them home, both of them living proof that miracles happen to those who believe in the power of a generous heart.